Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, as President Trump faces an impeachment inquiry, how do you think the press is treating the president? How is he treating them in return? A new poll sheds some new light on that tenuous relationship. Plus, what's the current state of news media coverage overall, both locally and nationally? A watchdog group claims there is a national crisis when it comes to local news coverage. So what do they mean by that? Two veteran reporters are with us tonight for a roundtable discussion of sorts on the changing landscape of news media coverage, and they will counter those claims of a crisis in their industry. But first, we have viewer reaction from last week's show here on the follow-up. In this Twitter comment, one viewer has some concerns about the polls we choose to use in our discussions on the presidential impeachment inquiry. Sean Willett in this tweet says, "Yo, that ABC poll was only 506 people and is not representative of the entire electorate. The Dems said they were going to impeach even before Mr. Trump took the oath of office. Stop pumping the party politics." Well, first of all, thanks for your Twitter comment, Sean. I would agree the poll in question is not representative of the entire electorate. However, it's not supposed to be. By definition, polls are generally a small sampling of the electorate with a small margin of error one way or the other. They are designed to give us a snapshot of what people are thinking and promote discussion and debate, which is what this show is all about. And we'd like to hear from more of you to help drive the conversation here on the follow-up. You can do that in a variety of ways on social media, on Twitter and Facebook. You can email us as well. And if you'd like to see any of our past shows this season, just log on to deltabroadcasting.org. Joining us now on the follow-up for the entire show are two veteran journalists. We have Bob Johnson over here from MLive, and he's a Delta College alumni, by the way. And Jiquanda Johnson, new to the follow-up. She's with the Flint Beat, founder and publisher, and she does a good job with her site, again, the Flint Beat, a nice online resource for news and information. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're going to kick around sort of the state of media coverage, both nationally and sort of locally. So let's look at a couple of polls first about what Americans think of the media. There seems to be a little mistrust, I guess. Americans' trust in mass media edges down, so only 13% of those polled trust the media a great deal, 28% a fair amount, and then we have sort of one more. Americans' trust in mass media, 69% of the Democrats, that's the number there, 15% of Republicans and 36% of the independents trust the media. So the Democrats, by and large, support the media or trust the media more than those others. Let's talk about President Trump and how they've handled him a little bit. He's come out with calling the media sort of fake news, and his critics will claim he only says that when those that criticize him. When you guys look at how the media treats Trump, how do you see it? Is it give and take? Are they unfair to him, do you think?
I've been back and forth with this, and I do think that as media, we're called to report and storytell, and I found that this current coverage of our president can be biased and lacks objectivity, and it can be considered unfair. You know, I think that we have to, even in the thick of it, when you don't like a candidate or you don't like a president, an elected official, you have to remain objective as possible.
Yeah.
So.
I see it. It's just a different type of way that he's been covered. Every time he tweets, it's news. Every time he does anything, it's news. So I just look at it, he just gets a lot more coverage than probably any other president I've ever seen. So you're going to see the good, you're going to see the bad, you're going to see the bias, and through all of that, it's up to the consumers to sort through and figure out what's the important news out of all that's coming out.
And it's so interesting because he is leveraging social media. I mean, he's the first one to use that Twitter. Sometimes he uses it too much, I would say, a little bit over the top, but it's been effective for him, right? I think it's been very, very effective for him.
I mean, they've written articles on his use of Twitter. You know, it's the first time in journalism that I've seen so many unnamed sources.
Yeah.
You know, White House official.
People close to the
president.
Yeah.
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 Where in the past, we'd never be allowed to do that,
Never.
right? Yeah, it's a changing way we do things. And
Yes.
there's some truth to what he says about, maybe fake news or the media being unfair to them. It's sort of a cottage industry of sorts, conservative media critics who have kind of sprung up online to draw attention to some salacious details about his life or his administration, which goes viral, and then days later you find, well, really that wasn't exactly true. The alternative facts, I love that term.
Yeah.
So do you think you're seeing a lot of that? That's where the fake news comes from, because the social media, people are throwing things out there without checking things, and it kind of gets out there and they run with it, and then later it just kind of goes viral and it's sort of not true, right? It just kind of breeds that.
It
Yeah.
does. I just don't think that that is the news that President Trump is referring to. I think that in the day of social media, you do have to have some type of news literacy. You do have to. Just today, I was telling a friend of mine who posted a story, they didn't read the byline. When I read the byline, the reporter's name was Takeout. Takeout. And the story was about a potluck and all these people getting sick. And so it's just those little things that now you have to be conscious of, like who's writing the story? Is it a .net? They have some special sites that even go through stories to tell you whether or not it's fake news.
And that's why it's so important to have credible and established news organizations. With the way social media is now, people will just throw anything on social media and it'll start catching on and spreading and going viral before someone say, "Hey, wait, stop! That's a satire
Sure.
story," or "That's not true. That's not what happened." And I find that a lot when I was covering locally in Saginaw, that something will start off as a rumor on Facebook, but there'll be a lot of people who would like tag us, the local reporters, in the post and ask, "Is this true?" Or you'll see some comments say, "I'm not going to believe that until I see it on MLive." So it's important to have those credible news organizations to stop that. Social media, something take off so quickly, and it's really hard to bring it back and get it under control.
Right. We'll talk, I think, more about social media and how you guys use it and how you rely on that to kind of generate some news with the folks that read MLive and read the Flint Beat. A lot has been reported dating back to the 2016 presidential election, right? The Russian influence on the presidential election, where Russians were kind of using Facebook to put some ads to kind of influence the election towards Donald Trump. And now, fast forward 3 years later to now, with the 2020 election coming up, you've got a lot of these social media sites taking a look at that going, well, like Twitter, for instance, said, well, we're not going to be running any political ads. Facebook said, no, we're going to continue to run them, and we're also not going to fact check them. So just want to get your thoughts on that. As journalists, should we be obligated to run these ads? Should we not? Is that just censorship? Or should we have be accountable and responsible to kind of say, wait a minute, if it's going to go on my site, I should monitor it a little bit.
It's a fine line.
Yeah.
It is, and I guess some of this boils down to capacity too. Like, what are newsrooms able to do, and who is going to monitor those things? Myself, personally, we fact check. I get, and it's a thing about trust for us too. Trust and accountability, even when it comes to ads, just like with news articles, social media sites, like we mentioned Facebook, now they're doing verification of newsrooms, and trying to do support for local news and credibility and who's real and who isn't and what's factual and what isn't. And so in this world with social media and the internet, there's so many layers that we have to pay attention to now. And I do think that we shouldn't run ads that are not factual if we know. And if we find out they are not, pull them.
I get what Twitter is trying to do by saying that people should elect the elected officials and not the person with the most money could buy all the ads and,
Like a Michael Bloomberg, who just came into the race this week. Yeah.
However, it's tricky once you get into that, because then what do you censor next? You know, or when do you stop? When do you say, okay, we're not going to get into this fight? Or even with Facebook, I get the criticism where Facebook has always tried to have the stance where they let you be you and not try to censor anything. But again, even on their end, but when do you start to make some rules when you see that this big massive machine has a lot of power to influence people, and that could be dangerous for, you know, one organization, one media company to have that type of influence. So where do you set these boundaries at? So that's a fine line. That's probably the next biggest fight that we'll see over the next few years about the responsibilities of social media giants.
Right. And I think people today, there's so much more news and information, and we do use social media to allow the viewers to kind of react and engage with us. I mean, at the top of the show, that's what I did. I had a Twitter comment, and I get stuff all the time. It's a way for them to sort of direct and drive the conversation. Do you do that on your site? Do you rely on some of the folks that you want them to react to your site and get involved and get engaged that way?
Most of my traffic comes through social media.
Okay.
And so we post stories. We select which stories we put on Facebook, or we tweet, or even Instagram. We do Instagram too. But most of my traffic comes through social media, probably about 90% of it.
Okay.
You know, from stories that we post on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And I engage audience members where they are. So I'm not going to say, hey, go to my site and join the conversation. We have the conversation right there on whatever platform that is. So we rely heavily on it.
And so do you guys. So if a group of us decide that there's a big story in my neighborhood, in my town, we can email you, we can get on Facebook, and that will then get a response from you guys that you might cover some things that it's important to the folks that are doing that.
A lot of tips, a lot of interesting story ideas. They come from people on social media. They send an inbox message or tag our reporters in the post, or even being a local reporter, a lot of people might even have your cell phone number, so they'll send you a text or call you. And so engaging with the community is a big way that a lot of us get our news stories.
Yeah.
Sure.
And know exactly what to look for and what people are talking about.
So now expanding on this, the chat we're having on local media news coverage, there was an article that was in the New York Times. You guys all saw it and read it. And it was penned by PEN America, a nonprofit organization that they say they celebrate literature and free expression. So they talked about the headline was a national crisis in local media coverage. And so I want to show you some highlights of what was in this article. Again, this was in the New York Times by PEN America, the organization there. So they claim during their research that because of lack of staffing and changes, school board and city council meetings across the country maybe don't get covered. On the next bullet point here, reporters receive tips about some impactful maybe news stories, but don't have time to follow up on the tips. The third bullet point was print advertising in general. The revenue is sort of plummeting, forcing them to cut costs. And that, as a result, many Americans are without access to crucial information about where they live. And I think and the last is another result of this crisis that they call it, not my words, is less engagement in political and civic life. On the surface, you can take any one of those. How do you counter that?
Well, it's first I want to say it's impossible to cover every single thing. And again, with social media making reporters so accessible now, you get thrown a lot of things that people think should be covered that even 10 years ago, no one thought about covering it. Another thing I wanted to say too was a lot of these meetings too are public. people, you can go straight to the city's website and watch these meetings that they say that we're not covering. But we do. We cover, reporters cover the important things. You can't be at every single meeting, correct? But when it's something that's very important, they're talking about raising water bills or shutting down schools or anything that's really, really important to the community. We're there. At least I can say we are in my company. We're there. We cover it. Another thing, like Jiquanda said, that most of our traffic comes from social media. Well, the way that people consume news now has it has changed and evolved. And it's not that we're not covering news. It's just that you cover it in different ways now. You bring it to the reader the way that they want. They used to go from print and TV to computers and laptops to tablets and cell phones, and now most of the news that people get come directly from social media.
Right.
So I feel like sometimes these numbers are based on the trends that are happening in legacy newsrooms and the shrinking newsroom there, and they're counting out the independent publishers. You know, we are a member of an organization called Institute for Nonprofit News, and the last time I checked, there was about 200 plus agencies, news organizations, and people who are supporting this local news initiative to make sure underserved and marginalized communities have news, right? And the numbers say that in that organization, there's a less than 6% failure rate. And so we're out there, we're working, don't count us out, you know, but I just think that sometimes when they do these surveys and do these articles and come up with these numbers, they're not looking at us. We're just now getting that data together. Some of us are just figuring out like sustainability and what that looks like. We're still working on that. We are definitely there. You know, there's another organization, Lion Publishers, independent newsrooms, boots on the ground in communities. You know, we have Flint Beat in Lansing, East Lansing Info, you know, really great job. They're probably at nearly every meeting in East Lansing.
Right.
You know, and so when you look at all these agencies coming together, collaborating, these independent newsrooms that are in the thick of it, people who live in these communities that decided that they needed more news and to fill these gaps, I'm pretty sure those numbers will change.
I think people's access to news, it's right there. I can get on my phone and I can catch MLive 24/7 if I want, which I do a lot. In the old days, you couldn't. You had to wait till 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock at the news. So there's more information, there's more access to it. And Bob, you and I talked about an article that one of your MLive reporters did in Ann Arbor in defense of not a defense, but in opposition to an article, again, on the New York Times, that it said something to the effect that the article they did was there was only one sort of news organization in Ann Arbor, and it was the student newspaper. And that was flat untrue, right? You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that was our boss. He's a big guy. John Heiner. We all saw the article and we read it, and you know, a lot of people were just baffled with. I think that was in the New York Times.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of baffled, and because we know that we have a lot of reporters in Ann Arbor that cover a lot of Ann Arbor news, and this article made it seem like that the U of M student reporters were the only reporters in the town, and that wasn't true. And so our big boss wrote an editorial just kind of explaining that wasn't accurate. You know, they could have reached out to us and got some comment, and just that we cover news, and he broke down what happened in Ann Arbor and how we cover news, and just explained it that we cover news, we cover it differently than, you know, we would have covered it 5, 10, 20 years ago.
Right. And in fact, I think the article said that you sent me was there's 1 million folks that that read
Yeah,
the news in Ann Arbor.
We are the biggest market in
right.
all of our, all 8 of our, and each of the 8 markets that we have, and I think we are the largest or most read news organization in the state.
I have to ask you about your site, because I think we were talking earlier that how did you get into that? How did you decide this is the site you wanted to do, and how important is that site to the folks that want to get news and information about Genesee County and Flint? And isn't that where sort of the business is going a little bit more, to sites like yours?
I think so.
Yeah.
Let's see, I just, in talking to community members, they just wanted news just for Flint. You know, at the time, I worked for MLive. I was a reporter covering City Hall, but that newsroom is shared with the county, and it was shrinking, and so you looked up 5 reporters covering the entire county, right? And also, I'm from Flint, and so at the time, we would have crime, sports, water crisis, all the time. Crime, sports, water crisis, and you knew that there were more stories to tell. And so I resigned and left to fill that gap. And I feel like we're trying. I wish there was 9 of me to cover each ward in Flint. There's not. We always could do better. And I think that, you know, when I'm getting it, when I'm grinding it out, like we're doing what we're supposed to do in that community. And I think I have the community's trust. That's another thing. Like, I don't deal with the mistrust and the fake news. I'm part of the community. They see me out. I could be at a community meeting, you know, volunteering, and people know me. I grew up in Flint. I'm 43. And so I know Flint, and Flint knows me.
Right. So what's interesting about your site is you're carving a niche in a specific geographic area. And to me, if I'm an advertiser, I'd want to advertise with you. Same with MLive. You've got 8 different sites all over the state, right? You're carving your niche in specific areas. To me, that would be a draw for an advertiser. Is that what they're trying to get at here a little bit? To me, that makes a lot of sense. You're just not throwing it at a dartboard. You're carving a niche, and you can draw some additional advertisers because you're passionate about a specific geographic area.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not big on ad sales. I'm not.
Okay.
We just got, in the last few months, I have our operations manager, and so he's handling that. And that's what the conversation is. Like, I know exactly who the readers are. I know exactly who the audience members are. And if you have a business in Flint, that's my audience, you know. And so they're saying, yeah, you know, that makes a big difference. It's not, I'm not really picking up readers in New York who can't get to the car dealership that's a couple blocks down the street, you know. I think that is a good niche. We'll see what happens as we venture out there to sell ads. Because, you know, in the ad world, there is some competition. We're a little cheaper than the big guys.
Right.
You know, so that might open up some doors for us also. So I do think it's a good place to be. And then having a relationship in the community, people knowing you, knowing your product, who you are, I think that's also a plus for me. It's
interesting how we've covered news so differently, and it's evolved, which we've touched on a little bit here. In the TV world, it was called sort of multimedia journalist, MMJs they call them. So when I was doing it full time, I'd have a photographer, sometimes I'd have a sound man. I'm the reporter. It's a 3-man crew, and now it's a 1-person crew that shoots and edits. I just think that industry is sort of, we become more multitasking, right? Do you feel that way, that you have to be more of a multitasker? It doesn't make it bad, it's just different, right?
Well, I'm a founder and a publisher, so I'm multitasking all the time.
You are.
But when I bring people on board, I'm kind of old school, you know. So if I can send a photographer out or someone to shoot video, and whoever is writing, if they could just focus on writing, I'm still that way. I feel like when we do that, something suffers. You know, either there's not great video, not great photos, not great writing, or all 3 suffer. And I try to get away from that.
Yeah.
I think it kind of sort of was going that way for a second, but like you said, something could suffer But for breaking news, however, that's the way to go. You know, if you're a one-man crew trying to do the breaking news, you kind of have to do it that way. And I think over the years, every news organization figured out when to have that that one person who can do it all versus sending a photographer, a videographer, and a writer.
Yeah. Well, in your case, I mean, you cover stories, you talk to people, you email, you put things on the website. I mean, you're a multitasker.
Yeah, so do a lot of.
I don't think we want to be. It's just that
And that's
they
the way it
have
is.
to be.
I didn't realize that until you just said it.
Yeah, it's
Well,
like-
well, you are, and so you're evolving as the business is evolving. And it's interesting, I stated it earlier, if we just had the 5 and 6 o'clock news or the noon, we'd wait till then to put it on.
Right.
Well, if I'm on a breaking news story, I'm on the web,
Yeah.
I'm on the phone calls, and you guys have
Yeah.
to do that. I mean,
Well-
it's become almost it's a 24/7
It is now.
news gathering operation.
I was at the Flint Journal before we did that, though.
Mhm.
I was part of the team that transitioned into that.
Right.
And I didn't even realize it. I looked up one day and I was taking pictures, and I was also on the design team, so I was laying out issues for the Flint Journal and doing some feature fronts. And one of the community members said it.
Mhm.
He said, you wrote the articles, you took the pictures, and then you laid this thing out. And I said, whoa, the industry is changing. And I hadn't even really paid attention to it. We just kind of got in where we fit in the newsroom. Wherever they needed help, that's just what we did.
Right.
And so I was part of the news team that saw it all happen.
And I came in right as it was turning that page.
Sure.
So it was always kind of fast paced for me, but we still kind of had the old school model as well.
Right, and you've been at it 10 years at MLive, and you've seen daily there's change, and it's going to change again, so it'll be interesting to see what's happening
My
next.
instructor here at Delta College told me
Yeah,
that this industry was going to change, and I didn't believe her.
Yeah.
And now
Well, here it is.
I look back and see it.
well, you're doing a good job. Thanks for holding up the industry standards at a high standard. We appreciate it. The Flint Beat with Jiquanda Johnson and Bob Johnson at MLive. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And that's our show for tonight, but be sure to join us again in 3 weeks on Tuesday, December 17th at 8 for the follow-up. We're taking a little break as QTV will be doing a pledge drive during that time, so we're asking for your support. We'll see you in a couple weeks.